The day my uncle died was the same day I lost my job. I was still sitting in my car in the company parking lot, staring at the cardboard box containing 7 years of my professional life, when my phone rang. Aunt Martha's name flashed on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. We'd never been close. She was the family member who showed up to criticize everyone's life choices, while Uncle Ben had been the one who always believed in me. "Rebecca," she said when I finally answered, her voice carrying that familiar tone of perpetual disappointment. "Ben passed last night. Heart attack. The funeral's Thursday." The news hit me like a physical blow. Uncle Ben, the man who taught me to fish, who slipped me $20 bills throughout my childhood with a wink and whispered advice to invest it wisely, was gone. I'll be there," I managed, my voice cracking. "There's something else?" Aunt Martha continued, not acknowledging my grief. "Ben left you something in his will. That useless plot of land out by Miller's Creek." "Land? What land?" 40 acres. "Of nothing but rocks and scrub brush," she scoffed. "You can't even build on it because of some environmental restriction. Complete waste. He could have left it to someone who might actually do something with it, but he insisted it go to you." I sat in stunned silence while she rattled off details about the funeral and how I'd need to meet with the lawyer afterward to sign paperwork for the land transfer. Uncle Ben owned land, and he'd left it specifically to me? The funeral was exactly what you'd expect, somber with Aunt Martha orchestrating everything down to the last detail. I sat in the back row, feeling like an outsider among relatives who hadn't bothered to keep in touch. After the service, a gentle tap on my shoulder introduced me to Mr. Harrington, Uncle Ben's lawyer. "Rebecca," he said, shaking my hand. "Ben spoke of you often, very fondly." That simple statement brought tears to my eyes. Mr. Harrington patted my shoulder gently. "If you can stop by my office tomorrow, we can go over the details of your inheritance. There's more to it than just the land deed." Aunt Martha overheard this and scoffed. "More to it? What else could there possibly be? That land isn't worth the paper the deed is printed on." Mr. Harrington gave her a measured look. "Ben had his reasons, Martha. He always did." The next morning, I entered Mr. Harrington's office, a space that smelled of old books and coffee. The walls were lined with dark wooden shelves filled with legal volumes that looked untouched for years. He gestured for me to sit in a leather chair that creaked under my weight. "First, the land," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. 42 acres in Miller's Creek. Ben purchased it nearly 30 years ago before the environmental restrictions were put in place. I opened the folder to find a deed, maps, and several official-looking documents. Is it really as worthless as Aunt Martha says? Mr. Harrington removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly with a handkerchief. "Value is relative, Rebecca. The land can't be developed commercially due to watershed protection laws. And yes, the soil is rocky, not ideal for farming. But Ben never seemed concerned about its market value." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small wooden box with intricate carvings on the lid. "He also wanted you to have this." The box was heavier than it looked. When I opened it, I found an old brass key, yellowed papers folded neatly, and a compass that looked antique, its needle swinging erratically. "He left instructions that you should visit the land before reading these papers," Mr. Harrington said. "He was quite specific about that." "Did he say why?" Ben was mysterious in his final instructions, but he did mention that you would understand when you saw the land for yourself. That night, I spread the contents of the box across my kitchen table. The compass continued its strange behavior, the needle never quite settling. But it was the papers that most intrigued me. They were sealed with wax, and across the fold, Uncle Ben had written, "Open only after you've walked the land. Promise me, Becca." Even in death, he was making me follow his rules. I smiled despite myself. I found a photo album with pictures of fishing trips with Uncle Ben, his arm around my shoulders as I proudly held up a small base. There was one photo I'd forgotten. Uncle Ben standing on what must have been his land, pointing at something in the distance, a strange intensity in his eyes. I turned the photo over and saw his handwriting. "The future is buried in the past. Remember that, Becca." The next morning, I loaded my car with basics: water, snacks, a first aid kit, sturdy boots, and my phone. Finding the property proved challenging. The GPS lost signal twice, and the county roads weren't all marked. Eventually, I spotted a weathered fence post with a faded B carved into it, Uncle Ben's marker. I parked by the roadside and climbed over the simple wire fence. Before me stretched a landscape that, at first glance, confirmed Aunt Martha's assessment. Rocky terrain with scattered brush, a few stunted trees, and not much else. The April sun beat down, making me glad I'd brought a hat. "What were you thinking, Uncle Ben?" I muttered, starting to walk the perimeter. After about 20 minutes, I noticed something odd. The compass, which I'd brought along out of curiosity, was behaving strangely. Its needle swung wildly whenever I faced east, toward a cluster of boulders near what appeared to be a dried-up creek bed. Following its guidance, I reached the boulders. They formed a rough circle, almost like they'd been deliberately arranged. In the center was a flat stone that didn't match the others, smoother, with what looked like chisel marks on its surface. With effort, I pushed the flat stone aside, revealing a hole about 3 feet deep. At the bottom was a metal box with a heavy padlock. The key from Uncle Ben's wooden box fit perfectly. Inside the metal container was a single item: a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The cover bore no title, just 2 initials pressed into the leather: H.M. I sat on one of the boulders and opened the journal to its first page. The handwriting was cramped but legible, dated April 17, 1889. "I have discovered something that will change the course of history." The samples confirm my suspicions. What lies beneath this unassuming land will make the California gold rush look like a child's game of marbles. But I must be cautious. There are those who would kill for such knowledge. My hands trembled as I turned to the next page, which contained a crude map with X marks and notations. One phrase was underlined several times: "Third Ridge, Morning Shadow, 20 paces north." I looked up from the journal, scanning the landscape with new eyes. The property had 3 distinct ridges running east to west. The morning sun would cast shadows from the easternmost side. As the sun began to set, I reluctantly closed the journal. Whatever secrets this land held had waited over a century. They could wait one more night. I carefully returned the journal to its box and placed it in my backpack, replacing the flat stone over the hole. During the drive home, my mind raced with possibilities. The initials H.M. Who could that be? And how did Uncle Ben come to own this land and know about the hidden journal? The connection between a 19th century discovery and my quiet, ordinary uncle seemed impossible. I stopped at a diner just off the highway, ordering coffee and pie while I finally opened the sealed papers from Mr. Harrington. Inside was a letter in Uncle Ben's familiar handwriting. "Dear Becca, if you're reading this, you've visited the land and hopefully found the first key to the puzzle. I know this must seem strange, possibly even foolish, but I've spent the last 20 years of my life piecing together what Harrison Miller discovered in 1889. Yes, the journal belongs to him, the original owner of that worthless land. The local surveyor who mapped most of the county but mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind only rumors and speculation. I found the journal by accident while hiking through the property shortly after I purchased it. What I've learned since then has consumed me, though I've kept my research secret from everyone, even your Aunt Martha. Some truths are too dangerous to share carelessly. The land isn't what it appears to be, Becca. Miller wasn't exaggerating. In his journal, there's something there, something valuable beyond measure, but accessing it requires solving the puzzle he left behind. I've tried for years, following the clues, digging where indicated, but my health failed before I could complete the journey. That's why I've left everything to you. You always had a knack for solving puzzles, even as a child. You see patterns where others see only chaos. Be careful, though. I'm not the only one who knows about Miller's discovery. Over the years, I've noticed signs of others watching the property. Strange cars parked on the county road. Footprints that weren't mine. They're waiting for someone to solve the puzzle, to do the hard work for them. Trust no one with this, Becca. Not even family. Inside the wooden box is a key to a storage unit in town. Thurberger 2117 at Safekeep Storage on Elm Street. Everything I've collected about Miller and his discovery is there. Start with the journal, then review my notes. The truth is waiting for you. I'm sorry to place this burden on you, but I know you're capable. You always were my favorite, the one who reminded me most of myself. Be safe. Be smart, Uncle Ben. Back in my apartment, I spread Miller's journal on the kitchen table and began reading in earnest. Harrison Miller had been the county surveyor, tasked with mapping the region for development in the late 1880s. During his survey of what would later become my inherited land, he'd noticed something peculiar about the soil composition and rock formations. His early journal entries were technical, filled with observations about mineral deposits and geological anomalies. But as I read further, the entries became more excited, less scientific. "The samples confirm it," one passage exclaimed. "Not gold, as I initially suspected, but something far more valuable. The ore contains rare earth elements in concentrations I've never seen documented. If my calculations are correct, this single deposit could be worth millions, perhaps tens of millions. I must secure this land before others discover its potential." Rare earth elements. I quickly researched what these were. Essential components in everything from smartphones to electric vehicles to military equipment. Highly valuable, especially in concentrated deposits, and often environmentally complicated to extract, which explained the restrictions on the land. But if Miller had discovered this in 1889, why hadn't it been mined? The answer came in the final pages of the journal. "I fear I've been followed. Carlyle suspects something, has been asking too many questions about my survey work. I cannot risk filing a formal claim that would draw attention. Instead, I have concealed the evidence of the main deposit and created a series of clues that only a true seeker would understand. The greatest treasure lies beneath, but the path to it must be earned through wit and perseverance. I leave this journal as the first breadcrumb on the trail." The journal ended abruptly. According to historical records Uncle Ben had collected, Harrison Miller vanished 2 days later, his disappearance becoming one of the county's enduring mysteries. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Did you enjoy your visit to your new property today? Not as worthless as some might think, is it?" A chill ran down my spine. Someone had been watching me. When I didn't respond, another text arrived. "The journal you found is only one of 3. I have the second. The third remains hidden. Perhaps we should discuss a partnership." I turned off my phone, heart pounding. Uncle Ben's warning echoed in my mind. Trust no one with this, Becca. Not even family. How did this person know I had found the journal? Had they been following me? Or did they have the property under surveillance? Early the next morning, I headed to Safekeep Storage, Unit Thurberger 217. I needed to see what Uncle Ben had discovered before deciding how to respond to my mysterious texter. Unit Thurberger 217 was medium-sized, with a roll-up door that squeaked as I opened it. Inside, cardboard boxes lined metal shelves, each labeled in Uncle Ben's meticulous handwriting. Miller, newspaper articles, county records, land surveys, geological reports. One corner held a desk with a detailed map of the property pinned to the wall above it. Red X's marked locations, with notes scribbled beside them. Dug, Teneft, nothing. Cave-in risk, possible shaft entrance, I picked up a leather-bound notebook labeled Research Journal and began flipping through it. April 7, 2010, found mention of Carlisle in county records. Edward Carlisle was a business partner of Jeremiah Blackwood, the railroad tycoon. Letters in the Historical Society suggest Carlisle knew something about Miller's work and may have been involved in his disappearance. I continued reading, learning how Uncle Ben had pieced together fragments of history from dusty archives and forgotten records. He'd tracked down descendants of people mentioned in county minutes, searched through mining claims, and even consulted with a geologist from the state university under the guise of historical research. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. February 12, 2019. A man approached me at the property today, said his name was Thomas Griffin, claimed to be a history professor researching 19th century surveyors, asked too many specific questions about Miller. When I checked later, no Thomas Griffin teaches history at any college within 200 miles. Someone knows what I'm looking for. The final entry was dated just 3 months before Uncle Ben's death. I'm being followed. The blue sedan has appeared too many times to be coincidence. I've moved all my research to the storage unit and told no one about the journal's location. If anything happens to me, Becca will know what to do. She's smarter than I ever was. The answer is in the third ridge, where the sun casts the morning shadow. 20 paces north, like Miller wrote, but the trick is knowing where to start counting. In the margin beside this entry, he'd written, "The compass always tells the truth, even when surrounded by deception." I needed to return to the property, at dawn, when the morning shadows would be longest. But first, I needed to understand who I was dealing with. In a box labeled Carlisle Family, I found newspaper clippings spanning more than a century. Local surveyor. Still missing Harrison Miller, county surveyor, has been missing for 2 weeks with no sign of his whereabouts. Miller was last seen leaving the offices of the Blackwood Mining Company after what witnesses described as a heated exchange with Edward Carlisle, business partner to Jeremiah Blackwood. When questioned, Mr. Carlisle stated that the disagreement was merely a professional difference of opinion regarding land assessments. Sheriff Williams continues the search, but expressed diminishing hope of finding Miller alive. Another clipping, dated 6 months later. Blackwood Mining purchases large tract. The Blackwood Mining Company has purchased several thousand acres north of Miller's Creek for what sources call an unprecedented sum. Edward Carlisle, now managing operations after Jeremiah Blackwood's unexpected retirement, announced plans for extensive development of the area's natural resources. Uncle Ben had constructed a timeline. 1889, Miller disappears 1890, Blackwood Mining buys surrounding lands 1891, 1897. Mining operations extract moderate amounts of minerals but never find the main deposit, 1898. Edward Carlisle dies unexpectedly. Mining operations scale back 1915. Blackwood Mining goes bankrupt during WWI 1952. Land purchased by Timber Company. Minimal development 1995. Environmental regulations restrict development 2001. Uncle Ben purchases the original Miller survey. Plot 1 modern clipping caught my eye. A business profile from the local paper. Carlisle Holdings expands downtown. Development Richard Carlisle, CEO of Carlisle Holdings and descendant of county pioneer Edward Carlisle, announced plans for a major development in the historic downtown district. "My family has deep roots in this community," Carlisle stated. "We're committed to honoring that legacy while building for the future." The article featured a photo of Richard Carlisle, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and salt-and-pepper hair. His company, reportedly, owned half the commercial real estate in town. My mysterious texter suddenly had a name and face. If Richard Carlyle was anything like his great-grandfather, he wouldn't hesitate to take what he wanted, by force if necessary. I checked my watch. 2:30 p.m. There wasn't enough time to reach the property before sunset, and I didn't want to be there after dark. I'd have to wait until morning to follow Miller's clue about the third ridge and morning shadows. I gathered the most relevant materials from the storage unit, Uncle Ben's research journal, maps of the property, and a folder labeled Miller's Clues, and loaded them into my car. As I drove away, I noticed a blue sedan parked across the street. My heart skipped a beat. The same blue sedan Uncle Ben had mentioned in his journal? I couldn't be sure, but I wasn't taking any chances. Instead of heading home, I drove to a small motel on the outskirts of town and checked in under a false name, paying cash. In my room, I spread everything across the bed, creating a makeshift investigation board. Red yarn connected related documents, forming a web of information that sprawled across the faded floral bedspread. At the center was a sketch Uncle Ben had made of the third ridge, with a question mark where the compass had pointed. Next to it lay Miller's cryptic clue: third ridge, morning shadow, 20 paces north. I set my alarm for 4:30 a.m., determined to reach the property before sunrise. Whatever Miller had hidden, whatever Uncle Ben had spent decades searching for, I was close to finding it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was racing against an adversary who'd been playing this game far longer than I had, and who had resources I couldn't match. As I drifted off to sleep, I clutched Uncle Ben's compass in my hand, watching as its needle continued to point in a direction that definitely wasn't north. Dawn was just a promise on the horizon when I arrived at the property. Stars still punctuated the sky, and the air held that special stillness that comes only in the moments before sunrise. I'd parked a quarter-mile away and hiked in through neighboring public land, taking a circuitous route in case someone was watching the main access road. Armed with a small backpack containing water, tools, Uncle Ben's compass, and Miller's journal, I made my way to the third ridge. By the time I reached the eastern slope, the sky had shifted from black to deep indigo, with a thin line of gold emerging where it met the land. I checked Uncle Ben's map one last time, confirming I was in the right spot, the area where the compass had pointed so insistently. Finding a large boulder to sit against, I waited, watching as the world slowly illuminated around me. The first rays of sunlight crested the horizon, sending long shadows stretching across the landscape. I held up the compass, which quivered before locking onto a direction that definitely wasn't north. Following its guidance, I walked along the ridge until I reached a peculiar formation of rocks, 3 stones arranged in a rough triangle. As the sun climbed higher, the shadow of the tallest stone stretched westward. This had to be it, the morning shadow Miller had written about. Taking a deep breath, I positioned myself at the tip of the shadow and began counting paces northward. 1, 2, 3. Each step felt momentous, as if I were walking in Uncle Ben's footsteps and Harrison Miller's before him. 18, 19, 20. I stopped and looked down. At first, I saw nothing special, just the same rocky soil that covered most of the property. Then I noticed something. A slight depression in the ground, perhaps 8 feet in diameter, as if the earth had settled over something below. Kneeling, I began to clear away loose stones and dirt. After removing the top layer, I found what appeared to be a flat wooden surface, badly weathered but still intact. The wood had been treated with something that had preserved it despite decades of exposure. In the center was a metal ring, tarnished green with age. My heart pounded as I gripped the ring and pulled. Nothing happened. I tried again, straining, harder, and felt a slight give. On the third attempt, the wooden cover shifted, revealing darkness beneath. Using my phone's flashlight, I peered into what appeared to be a shaft, shored up with timbers and descending vertically into the earth. Mining shaft. Miller had constructed a hidden entrance to whatever lay below, disguising it so well that even Blackwood Mining had never found it, despite owning the surrounding land. Iron rungs embedded in one wall formed a ladder descending into the darkness. They looked ancient and potentially dangerous. I tested the first one with my weight. It held firm. Taking a deep breath, I began to climb down, the beam of my flashlight illuminating the way. The shaft descended about 20 feet before opening, into a small chamber carved from the rock. The air was surprisingly fresh. There must be some natural ventilation system keeping it from becoming stale over the decades. In the center of the chamber stood a small table, its surface covered with a thick layer of dust. On it lay a leather-bound book identical to the journal I'd found earlier, and beside it, a wooden box. With trembling hands, I brushed the dust from the journal and opened it to the first page. October 3rd, 1889. If you are reading this, then you have solved the first part of my puzzle and found the entrance. Congratulations, but this is merely the beginning. What lies beneath this chamber is worth more than gold, but extracting it requires knowledge that would be dangerous in the wrong hands. The full survey, the true extent of the deposit, and the method for safe extraction are contained in my third and final journal. But I cannot simply give you this information. Too much is at stake. Too many would kill to possess it. You must prove your worth and your intentions. The box contains my most precious instruments, the tools that led me to this discovery. Use them to find the final journal. The heart of the secret lies where avarice and nature wage their eternal war. Trust no one. Carlyle's reach extends further than I initially believed. Even now, as I write this, I fear I am running out of time. Harrison. Miller, I turned to the wooden box. Inside were surveying instruments, a folding brass sextant, a small telescope, and another compass, more elaborate than Uncle Ben's. These were the tools of Miller's trade, preserved for over a century in this hidden chamber. Leafing through the second journal, I found detailed observations about soil compositions, rock strata, and mineral content, the scientific evidence supporting Miller's claims about the rare earth elements. The final pages contained complex calculations and what appeared to be a partial map, deliberately incomplete. The final piece awaits where fire meets stone beneath the watchful eye. Another riddle. I carefully packed the journal and instruments into my backpack. As I prepared to climb back up the ladder, I heard something that made my blood freeze. The scrape of boots on stone above me. I quickly extinguished my flashlight, plunging the chamber into total darkness. Footsteps approached the edge of the shaft, and a beam of light pierced the darkness, sweeping across the chamber floor. "Ms. Sanders?" a male voice called down. "I know you're down there. There's no need to hide." How had they found me? I'd been so careful. We've been watching this property for years, just as your uncle did before you. The only difference is, we have resources he lacked. Please come up so we can talk like civilized people. I remained silent, pressing myself against the wall of the chamber, clutching Miller's journal and the box of instruments to my chest. "Very well," the voice continued. "I'll wait up here. Take your time examining what Miller left behind. But remember, you need to come up eventually, and I have all day." He was right. I was trapped. Unless there was another way out of this chamber that Miller had created, an escape route in case he was discovered. Risking a brief flash of light, I examined the walls of the chamber more carefully. On the far side, partially hidden behind a natural rock formation, I noticed what appeared to be a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. My only hope was that it led somewhere other than a dead end. Silently, I gathered Miller's journal and instruments, stuffed them into my backpack, and began crawling into the unknown darkness, away from the voice above and toward whatever secret Harrison Miller had deemed worth dying for. The tunnel was a nightmare, tight, winding, and seemingly endless. I crawled on my elbows and knees, inching forward through near-total darkness, using only occasional flashes of my phone's light to check for obstacles. The air grew thinner, and the walls seemed to press closer with each yard I covered. Claustrophobia threatened to overwhelm me several times, but the thought of the man waiting at the shaft entrance kept me moving. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the tunnel began to widen and slope upward. Finally, it opened into another small chamber, this one natural rather than man-made, a limestone cave with stalactites hanging from the ceiling like stone daggers. I allowed myself a proper look around with my flashlight. Water trickled down one wall, collecting in a small pool before disappearing into a crack in the floor. The cave had multiple openings, 3 different tunnels leading in different directions. Which way had Miller intended? I examined the instruments in the wooden box, focusing on the elaborate compass. Unlike Uncle Ben's, this one had additional markings around the edge of the face, strange symbols that didn't correspond to any navigational system I recognized. Miller's last clue echoed in my mind. The final piece awaits where fire meets stone beneath the watchful eye. Fire meets stone. What could that mean? Volcanic activity? There wasn't any in this region as far as I knew. I studied the compass again, noticing that one of the symbols resembled a flame. When I rotated the compass so that symbol aligned with the needle, it pointed directly at the leftmost tunnel. Worth a try. This tunnel was mercifully larger, allowing me to walk hunched over rather than crawl. After several minutes, I began to notice something unusual. The walls contained veins of a peculiar mineral that seemed to catch and reflect my flashlight beam with an iridescent quality. I stopped to examine one vein more closely. The material wasn't like anything I'd seen before. Not quite metallic, but with a crystalline structure that seemed to shift colors as the light moved across it. Using a small pocket knife, I carefully chipped off a sample and tucked it into my backpack. The mineral veins grew thicker and more numerous as I continued. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast underground cavern that took my breath away. My flashlight couldn't illuminate the full extent of the space, but what I could see was spectacular. The ceiling soared at least 30 feet high, with massive columns of stone connecting floor to ceiling. The walls glittered with veins of minerals in shades of blue, purple, and green. A small underground stream cut through the center of the cavern, its water crystal clear. But the most remarkable feature was at the far end, a formation of reddish stone that resembled a frozen flame, reaching up toward a natural skylight in the cavern ceiling. The morning sunlight pierced through this opening, creating what looked exactly like a watchful eye as it illuminated the flame-shaped stone. Where fire meets stone beneath the watchful eye. This had to be it. I waded across the shallow stream and approached the formation. Up close, I could see that the reddish flame wasn't natural at all, but carved from the stone with remarkable precision, then coated with some mineral that gave it its fiery color. At its base, a small alcove had been cut into the rock, just large enough to hold a metal box similar to the one I'd found in the first hidden chamber. Unlike the previous box, this one had no visible lock, just a series of movable rings with symbols matching those on Miller's compass. I studied the compass again, realizing it wasn't just a navigational tool, but a key. The symbols around its edge corresponded exactly to those on the box. As I started to align the rings, a voice behind me froze me in place. "I'll take it from here, Ms. Sanders." I turned slowly to find a man standing on the other side of the stream, distinguished, well-dressed despite being in a cave, with wire-rimmed glasses and salt-and-pepper hair. Richard Carlyle. In his hand was a small but deadly-looking pistol. "How did you find me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your uncle wasn't the only one who studied Miller's clues," he replied with a thin smile. "The difference is I had resources he lacked, including a team of geologists who mapped these cave systems years ago. We've known about this cavern, but not what it contained. You led us to the final piece." Behind him, 2 men in outdoor gear stood watching. One I didn't recognize, and another who matched Uncle Ben's description of Thomas Griffin, the fake history professor. "Now," Carlyle continued, "please step away from the box." "Why is this so important to you?" I asked, trying to buy time while my mind raced for options. "Your family already owns half the town. You're wealthy." Something flashed in his eyes, not just greed, but something deeper, more personal. "This isn't about money, Ms. Sanders. It's about legacy. Edward Carlyle was cheated by Miller. They were partners in the original survey, but Miller betrayed him, keeping the most valuable discovery for himself. My family has spent generations trying to reclaim what's rightfully ours." "That's not how the historical records tell it," I countered. "Miller was working independently. Your great-grandfather tried to steal his discovery." Carlyle waved his free hand dismissively. "History is written by those who survive. Miller disappeared, allowing others to craft the narrative. Regardless, I intend to finally complete what my ancestors began." He gestured with the gun. "The box, please." I had no choice. I stepped aside as Carlyle crossed the stream, his expensive hiking boots splashing through the crystal-clear water. He approached the flame-shaped formation, eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Do you know what's in that third journal?" I asked. "Miller's journals have been building up to something beyond just mineral wealth. There's something about this place. Something unique." "All the more reason to possess it," he replied, kneeling to examine the box. "Griffin, bring me that backpack. I need to see the compass she found." As Thomas Griffin crossed the stream toward me, I noticed something odd, a faint humming sound coming from the walls, growing louder by the second. The mineral veins began to glow softly in response to the sound, creating an eerie blue-green illumination throughout the cavern. "What's happening?" Griffin asked, stopping midstream. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "The minerals, they're responding to something." Carlyle ignored the phenomenon, focused entirely on the box. Without Miller's compass, which was still in my backpack, he began trying different combinations with the rings, growing increasingly frustrated when nothing worked. The humming intensified, and suddenly, a musical tone resonated through the cavern. A clear, pure note that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The mineral veins pulsed brighter in response, and I watched in astonishment as tiny crystals began to form on the surface of the stream, freezing it in an instant. Griffin, still standing in the water, cried out as ice formed around his boots, trapping him. The other man rushed to help him, while Carlyle remained oblivious, still working on the box. Another tone sounded, higher than the first, and the ground began to tremble. Small stones fell from the ceiling as the vibrations intensified. "We need to leave," I shouted to Carlyle. "Something's happening to the cavern." He glanced up, finally noticing the glowing walls and trembling ground. For a moment, fear replaced avarice in his eyes. Then his jaw set with determination. "Not without what I came for," he growled, turning back to the box. A third tone, even higher, pierced the air, and larger chunks of rock began to fall. The cavern was becoming unstable. Griffin's companion had managed to free him from the ice, and they were already retreating toward the tunnel entrance. "Your men are leaving you," I warned Carlyle. He didn't even look up. "Cowards, I'm close to solving it." The ceiling directly above him cracked ominously. I had seconds to make a decision. Leave him to his fate or risk my own safety to save a man who had threatened me at gunpoint. The outcome of that choice would change everything. I lunged forward, grabbing Carlyle's arm and yanking him away from the flame-shaped formation just as a massive chunk of ceiling crashed down where he'd been kneeling. The metal box was crushed beneath the rubble, along with any hope of easily accessing Miller's third journal. "We have to go now," I shouted over the cacophony of falling rock and resonating tones. For once, Carlyle didn't argue. We splashed across the stream, now only partially frozen, and sprinted toward the tunnel entrance. His men had already disappeared into the passage. The glowing mineral veins provided enough light to navigate by, which was fortunate since I dropped my flashlight during the chaos. We'd nearly reached the tunnel when a particularly violent tremor shook the cavern. A fissure opened in the floor between us and our escape route, too wide to jump across. We were cut off. There! Carlyle pointed to another opening on the far side of the cavern. That passage might lead out. With no better options, we raced toward it as the ceiling continued to collapse behind us. This tunnel was different from the one I'd entered through. Wider, with a smooth floor that sloped gently upward. Unlike the natural formation of the other passages, this one showed signs of deliberate construction, with tool marks visible on the walls. Miller made this, I gasped as we ran. It's an escape route. The tunnel curved and twisted but maintained its upward trajectory. After several minutes of desperate flight, the rumbling behind us began to fade. The glowing minerals became less prevalent, and soon we were running in near darkness, guided only by the faint light ahead. Finally, the tunnel ended at a vertical shaft with iron rungs embedded in the wall, similar to the entrance I'd discovered earlier. Daylight filtered down from above. "Ladies first," Carlyle said with unexpected courtesy, gesturing to the ladder. I eyed him suspiciously. "So you can push me if the mood strikes?" A strange expression crossed his face, something like shame. "I just saved your life, Ms. Sanders. You just saved mine. Perhaps we could call a temporary truce." I hesitated, then began climbing. The shaft was about 15 feet high, ending at a hatch disguised as a flat rock. I pushed it open and emerged onto the western slope of the third ridge, the opposite side from where I'd entered the underground system. Carlyle followed, brushing dust from his expensive clothes as he surveyed our surroundings. His 2 men were nowhere to be seen. "Your employees abandoned you," I observed. "They're paid to acquire information, not die for it," he replied with a shrug. "They'll return to our meeting point once they've made it to safety." We stood in awkward silence for a moment, the afternoon sun warm on our faces after the cool darkness below. Despite everything, I felt a strange sense of accomplishment. I'd found Miller's second journal and his surveying instruments, confirming the existence of the rare earth deposit. Only the third journal remained elusive, presumably buried beneath tons of rock in the collapsed cavern. "What happens now?" I finally asked. Carlyle removed his glasses, cleaning them methodically with a handkerchief. "That depends on you, Ms. Sanders. The mineral deposit Miller discovered is still there, regardless of the cavern's collapse. With your property rights and my resources, we could extract it profitably." "You want to be partners?" I asked incredulously. "After threatening me at gunpoint?" "Business often begins with adversarial negotiations," he replied smoothly. "The situation has changed. The third journal is lost, at least temporarily. Neither of us can proceed alone. You lack the resources to extract the minerals, and I lack the legal right to access the property. What would this partnership entail exactly?" "A simple arrangement. You grant access rights, I provide the capital and expertise for extraction. We split the profits equally." It sounded reasonable on the surface, but Uncle Ben's warnings echoed in my mind. Carlyle couldn't be trusted. His family had potentially murdered Harrison Miller, and Carlyle himself had held me at gunpoint less than an hour ago. "I need time to consider it," I said cautiously. "Of course." He reached into his pocket and extracted a business card. "My direct number. Call me when you've decided." As he turned to leave, I remembered something. What did Miller mean by where avarice and nature wage their eternal war? Carlyle paused. The flame-shaped formation. Miller was something of a philosopher in his journals. He believed the pursuit of wealth inevitably came at nature's expense, that human greed was perpetually at war with the natural world. Yet he discovered something he believed was worth billions, I pointed out. "The contradiction wasn't lost on him," Carlyle replied. "His later writings suggest he was developing a method for extraction that would preserve the cavern's integrity. That's what I believe was in the third journal. Not just the extent of the deposit, but a sustainable way to access it. With that surprising insight, he departed, picking his way carefully down the ridge toward where a black SUV waited on a distant fire road. I watched until he disappeared from view, then checked my phone. No signal, unsurprisingly. I had a long hike back to my car, giving me plenty of time to think about my next move. By the time I reached my car, dusk was approaching. I drove straight to a hardware store in town, purchasing a small fireproof safe. At a coffee shop with Wi-Fi, I researched rare earth minerals and their extraction processes, discovering they were even more valuable now than when Uncle Ben had begun his investigation, due to their essential role in green technology and electronics. That evening in my motel room, I carefully examined Miller's second journal and surveying instruments. The journal contained detailed maps of the underground system, including passages I hadn't explored. One page showed a schematic for a specialized extraction method that would preserve the cavern structure while accessing the mineral veins, exactly what Carlyle had mentioned. As I studied the maps, I noticed something odd. Miller had marked 3 separate entrances to the cavern system, but I'd only encountered 2: the main shaft on the eastern slope and the escape route on the western slope. According to his notations, a third entrance existed on the northern edge of the property, marked with a symbol that matched 1 on his compass. This could be crucial information. If the main cavern had collapsed, this third entrance might provide an alternate route to where the final journal had been hidden. Before making any decisions about Carlyle's offer, I needed to explore this possibility. My phone rang, startling me. "Unknown number," I answered cautiously. "Rebecca? It's Martha." My aunt's voice sounded strained. "There are men at my house asking about you and Ben's land. They say they're business associates, but something doesn't feel right. What have you gotten yourself into?" My blood ran cold. Carlyle's temporary truce apparently didn't extend to playing fair. "Aunt Martha, listen carefully. Don't tell them anything. Call the police right now." "They said they'd hurt me if I called anyone," she replied, her voice breaking. "What was Ben hiding? Why is this happening?" "I'm calling the police for you," I promised. "Stay somewhere safe in the house until they arrive." After ensuring help was on the way to Aunt Martha's, I packed my belongings. I couldn't stay at the motel. Carlyle clearly knew how to find me and wasn't above threatening my family to get what he wanted. I needed a secure location and a plan. It was time to take this to the authorities, but not the local police. Carlyle was too influential in this small town. I needed someone with more power and fewer local connections. In Miller's time, he'd had nowhere to turn when Edward Carlyle pursued him. But I had options that hadn't existed in 1889. With renewed determination, I pulled out my laptop and began composing an email to the regional office of the FBI. Special Agent Diana Mercer didn't look impressed as she reviewed the materials spread across the table in her office at the regional FBI headquarters. "Let me understand this, Ms. Sanders," she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "You're alleging that Richard Carlyle, the Richard Carlyle who sits on the State Commerce Board, threatened you at gunpoint over minerals you believe exist on your property based on a journal from 1889? Put that way, it sounded absurd even to me. I know how it sounds, but I have evidence." Agent Mercer picked up Miller's second journal, examining it skeptically. "This looks old, but it could be an elaborate fake. And these mineral samples..." She gestured to the fragments I'd collected from the cavern walls. "We'd need a geological assessment to determine if they're as valuable as you claim." My aunt was threatened, I insisted. The local police responded to her call and confirmed men matching the description of Carlyle's associates were at her property. "Trespassing and threatening behavior we can investigate," Mercer conceded. "But connecting that directly to Carlyle requires more than circumstantial evidence." I was losing her. "What about the underground chambers? The collapse? There's physical evidence there." which would require a search warrant to properly investigate, she replied. And frankly, a judge would laugh this out of their chambers without more substantial proof. My hopes deflated. I'd expected skepticism, but not outright dismissal. Then, Mercer surprised me. However, she continued, there have been other complaints about Carlyle Holdings in recent months. Allegations of strong-arm tactics in property acquisitions, suspicious financial transactions, potential connections to unauthorized mining operations on federal land. She closed Miller's journal. Your story fits a pattern we've been monitoring. So, you believe me? I believe something is happening, and it warrants further investigation. But we need to proceed carefully. Carlyle is powerful, with political connections at the state level. She wrote something on a pad and slid it across to me. Dr. Elena Vasquez, State University Geology Department. Tell her I sent you. Get those mineral samples analyzed, professionally documented. If they're as valuable as you believe, that gives us leverage. What about Carlyle's threats? We'll assign an agent to monitor the situation, but discreetly. If Carlyle believes he's under investigation, he'll be more careful, and potentially more dangerous. It wasn't the immediate action I'd hoped for, but it was a start. As I gathered my materials, Mercer gave me a final warning. Ms. Sanders, be careful. Don't return to that property alone. And don't confront Carlyle directly. Men like him are most dangerous when they feel cornered. I drove straight to the State University, where I found Dr. Vasquez in her lab. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with intelligent eyes that lit up when I mentioned Agent Mercer's name. Diana and I go way back, she explained, examining the mineral samples I'd brought. We worked together on that mining fraud case in the western counties last year. She placed one of the samples under a sophisticated microscope, adjusting settings as she studied it. This is unusual. The crystalline structure doesn't match common mineral formations in this region. Is it valuable? I asked. Potentially. These appear to be rare earth elements, but in a composition I haven't encountered before. She looked up from the microscope. I'll need to run a full spectroscopic analysis. That will take time. How much time? A few days for preliminary results, longer for comprehensive documentation. Days I might not have if Carlyle decided to take more aggressive action. Is there anything you can tell me now? Something I can use to convince people I'm not crazy? Dr. Vasquez considered this, then took another sample to a different machine. After several minutes of analysis, she turned to me with newfound respect in her eyes. These samples contain at least 4 rare earth elements in concentrations far exceeding commercially viable deposits currently being mined worldwide. If these are representative of a larger formation, we're talking about potentially billions in market value. She handed me a printout of the preliminary analysis. This isn't comprehensive enough for legal proceedings, but it should help convince the right people to take you seriously. Armed with this scientific validation, I returned to my motel to find a police car parked outside my room. Officer Garcia, who had responded to Aunt Martha's call, was waiting for me. Ms. Sanders, she said gravely, we need to talk about what happened at your aunt's house. Inside my room, she explained that while the men had fled before police arrived, they'd left behind surveillance equipment hidden around the property. Professional-grade stuff, Garcia said. Not the kind of thing random troublemakers would have access to. Your aunt is pretty shaken up. Is she safe now? She's staying with a friend whose address isn't associated with her. But this situation is escalating in ways that concern me. Garcia leaned forward. The thing is, my captain wants me to drop this. Says there's not enough evidence to pursue it further. Let me guess, I said bitterly. Carlyle made a call. Garcia's silence was confirmation enough. Officially, I'm telling you that the investigation is at a dead end. Unofficially. She slid a card across the table. My brother-in-law works for the State Environmental Protection Agency. He's been trying to build a case against Carlyle Holdings for water contamination near one of their development projects. He might be interested in what you know. This unexpected ally gave me hope. Thank you. After Garcia left, I called the number she'd provided and reached Anthony Diaz at the EPA. Our conversation was brief but productive. He agreed to meet me the following morning to discuss potential environmental concerns related to the mineral deposit on my property. That night, I studied Miller's maps again, focusing on the third entrance he'd marked. If I could locate it, perhaps I could find another way to access the chamber where the final journal had been hidden. But exploring alone would be foolish after everything that had happened. I needed allies with the right expertise. Between Agent Tialbai, Mercer's skeptical support, Dr. Vasquez's scientific validation, and potentially the EPA's environmental interest, I was building a coalition that might stand against Carlyle's influence. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My offer still stands, but my patience has limits. 24 hours to decide. R.C. Carlyle was pressing for an answer to his partnership proposal. Little did he know I was assembling resources to challenge him. But I had to move quickly. Each hour that passed increased the risk that he would take matters into his own hands. I needed one more critical resource: legal protection for the land itself. If Carlyle couldn't be stopped directly, perhaps the property's status could be changed to put it beyond his reach. With that thought in mind, I called Mr. Harrington, Uncle Ben's lawyer. I was wondering when I'd hear from you, he said, when I explained the situation. Your uncle anticipated something like this might happen. He prepared additional documents that I was instructed to show you only if you discovered what the land truly contained. What kind of documents? A framework for a conservation trust. If activated, it would place the land and everything beneath it under strict scientific and environmental protection. Mining would still be permitted, but only under stringent oversight, with profits directed toward research and conservation. This was exactly what I needed: a legal shield against Carlyle's ambitions. How quickly can we put this in place? The paperwork is ready. I just need your signature. But Rebecca, his voice grew cautious. Once filed, this becomes public record. Carlyle will know immediately, and it will eliminate any pretense of negotiation. Are you prepared for his reaction? I thought about Agent Mercer's warning that Carlyle would be most dangerous when cornered. But I also thought about Miller and Uncle Ben, two men who had protected this discovery at great personal cost because they understood its true value, went beyond profit. I'll be at your office tomorrow morning, I decided. Have the papers ready. As I ended the call, a plan began to take shape. A coordinated approach using legal, scientific, and regulatory pressures to outmaneuver Carlyle. I might not have his resources or connections, but I had something potentially more powerful: the truth about what lay beneath that worthless land, and a growing network of allies committed to protecting it. The showdown was coming sooner than I expected, and with stakes higher than I'd imagined when I first accepted Uncle Ben's strange inheritance. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon as I arrived at Mr. Harrington's office the next morning. The approaching storm seemed fitting for the confrontation ahead. Inside, the lawyer had the Conservation Trust documents spread across his conference table, each page flagged where I needed to sign. Ben designed this carefully, he explained as I skimmed the paperwork. It establishes a board of trustees including scientific experts, conservationists, and you as the primary representative. Any mining operation would require unanimous approval from the board and strict adherence to environmental safeguards. Exactly what Miller wanted, I murmured, remembering the second journal's extraction schematics designed to preserve the cavern's integrity. As I signed the final page, a weight lifted from my shoulders. The trust wouldn't stop Carlyle entirely, but it would force him to operate within legal constraints, under public scrutiny. I'll file these electronically now, Mr. Harrington said, moving to his computer. Once they're in the system, they become public record. That provides another layer of protection. By the time I left his office, the Conservation Trust was official. My next stop was the state EPA, where Anthony Diaz was waiting with surprising news. "Your timing is impeccable," he said, ushering me into his office. "We've been monitoring water samples downstream from your property for months. There are trace elements appearing that match what you described from the underground system." "Is that a problem?" "It could be," Diaz replied. "These elements aren't harmful in their current concentrations, but they're unusual enough to trigger regulatory oversight. If someone were to begin mining operations and disturb the natural containment, we'd have grounds to intervene immediately." He pulled up a topographical map on his computer. "The watershed protection restrictions on your land make more sense. Now, the underground system connects to the county's primary aquifer. Any contamination could affect water supplies for thousands of people. This environmental connection strengthened my position significantly. I shared Dr. Vasquez's preliminary analysis with Diaz, who immediately recognized its implications. "This changes everything," he said. "With concentrations this high, any extraction would require extensive environmental impact studies before approval." He made copies of everything for his files. "Consider the EPA officially interested in your property, Ms. Sanders." My coalition was growing stronger. From the EPA, I headed to the university to check on Dr. Vasquez's progress. She greeted me with excited eyes. "These samples are extraordinary," she said, leading me through her lab. "It's not just the rare earth elements, though those alone would make this a significant discovery. It's the crystalline structure. Look here." On a monitor, she showed me magnified images of the mineral samples. "These formations shouldn't exist naturally. The molecular alignment is too perfect, too deliberate." "What does that mean?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I've sent images to colleagues in materials science. There's something about the way these crystals respond to energy that defies current models of physics." She handed me a preliminary report documenting her findings. "This is enough to justify a full scientific expedition to the site. The university would fund it immediately if you'd grant access." "I'd need assurances about preservation," I said cautiously. "Of course," she agreed. "Scientific study only. No commercial extraction without your approval." Another ally secured. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Mercer. "Activity at Carlyle Holdings. Multiple vehicles leaving main office. Stay away from property until further notice." My heart raced. Carlyle must have learned about the Conservation Trust filing. He was making his move. I needed to reach my property before Carlyle's team, but I couldn't go alone. I called Officer Garcia, who answered immediately. "I was just about to call you," she said, voice tight with urgency. "There's a situation developing. Multiple vehicles observed entering the restricted area of your property. My captain's refusing to send officers, claiming it's a civil matter." "I need to get out there," I said. "Can you meet me?" She hesitated. "Only briefly." "Officially, I'm off duty. Unofficially, I'll be at the County Road Junction in 15 minutes. I made one more call, to Agent Mercer, updating her on the situation. She promised to dispatch agents, but warned they might be 30 minutes out. "Don't engage Carlyle directly," she cautioned. "Document everything from a safe distance until backup arrives." The storm broke as Officer Garcia and I approached my property in her personal vehicle. Rain lashed against the windshield in heavy sheets. Through the downpour, we could make out several vehicles parked near the base of the third ridge. Carlyle's black SUV, the blue sedan I'd seen before, and a mud-splattered pickup truck. "They're definitely here," I said, pointing. "The main entrance to the underground system is on that ridge." We parked at a distance and used binoculars to observe. Through the rain, we could see men in mining gear unloading equipment from the pickup. "They're planning to extract samples," Garcia said, "maybe trying to establish a claim that predates your conservation trust." Lightning flashed, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The storm was intensifying, and water had begun, streaming down the slopes toward the open shaft entrance. "That's not good," I said suddenly. "The underground system is connected to natural water channels. In a heavy storm like this, parts of it could flood." As if confirming my fears, shouts echoed across the property, followed by men emerging from the shaft entrance. They sprinted toward the vehicles, panic evident even from our distance. "Something's wrong," Garcia said, starting the engine. "We need to check this out." We approached cautiously, using the storm as cover. One of the men spotted us and pointed. Richard Carlyle emerged from behind the pickup truck, rain plastering his expensive clothes to his body. "Sanders!" he shouted, over the storm. "There are people trapped down there. The lower tunnel is flooding." The accusation in his voice was clear. He believed I'd set a trap for his men. But the genuine panic in his eyes told me something serious was happening. "How many?" I demanded. "Griffin and 2 others," he replied. "They were in the main chamber when water started pouring in from somewhere. The shaft entrance is already flooded out." I remembered Miller's maps showing how the cavern system connected to natural water channels. In a storm this severe, certain chambers would fill completely within minutes. "There's another entrance," I said. "On the western slope. It might still be accessible." Garcia radioed for emergency services while I led Carlyle around the ridge to where I'd emerged from the escape tunnel days earlier. The disguised hatch was partially open, water pouring in, but the entrance still viable. "I'll go first," Garcia volunteered, attaching a safety line from her emergency kit to her belt. "Sanders can guide me, but she stays here until we confirm it's safe." I described the passage layout, emphasizing the chamber's location and the rising water risk. Garcia disappeared into the hatch, her radio crackling with updates as she progressed. I can hear shouting. Her voice came through Carlyle's radio after several tense minutes. "The main chamber is partially flooded, water rising fast. I see 3 individuals on elevated ground near some kind of stone platform, requesting immediate assistance." Carlyle turned to me. "You know the layout. We need you down there." Despite everything, he was right. I secured a safety line to my belt before descending into the hatch. The passage was already ankle-deep in flowing water, making the journey treacherous. We moved as quickly as safety allowed, finally emerging into the main cavern. The scene was chaos. Water poured in from multiple fissures in the walls, and the once dry floor was now a churning pool, several feet deep. The central area where the flame-shaped formation had stood remained partially above water, creating a small island where Griffin and 2 others huddled with Officer Garcia. As we waded closer, I saw what had caused the disaster. The collapse during my previous visit with Carlyle had opened new channels connecting the cavern to water sources above. The heavy storm had turned those channels into waterfalls that were rapidly filling the chamber. "We need to evacuate now," Garcia shouted over the roar of water. One of the men pointed frantically to a collection bag floating nearby. "The samples! We can't leave them!" "Forget the samples," Carlyle commanded, surprising me. "Move!" The journey back through the passage was a nightmare, fighting against flowing water while navigating the narrow, winding tunnel. By the time we reached the hatch, we were all exhausted, gasping for breath as hands from above pulled us to safety. On the surface, emergency vehicles had arrived, their lights flashing through the downpour. Paramedics immediately attended to Griffin and the other workers, while sheriff's deputies questioned Carlyle about the unauthorized presence on my property. I stood in the rain, watching as the hatch we'd escaped from overflowed with water from below. The underground chambers would be inaccessible for days, possibly weeks, after a deluge like this. Nature itself had intervened to protect Miller's discovery until proper scientific and legal protections could be established. As medical personnel checked me for injuries, Agent Mercer approached, rain dripping from her FBI windbreaker. "Quite the dramatic scene," she observed dryly. "We found something interesting in Carlyle's vehicles. Care to take a look?" She led me to where 2 agents were cataloging items, spread across the tailgate of Carlisle's SUV, protected from the rain by a tarp. Sophisticated surveillance equipment, including directional microphones and small cameras. Maps of my property with X's marking spots identical to Uncle Ben's research. Most damning of all, a file containing background information on me, Mr. Harrington, and anyone else connected to Uncle Ben. Stalking, illegal surveillance, trespassing, attempted theft of valuable minerals, Mercer listed. And that's before we get to the intimidation of your aunt and the gun he reportedly pulled on you earlier. Will the charges stick? I asked. He's powerful, with resources. The evidence is substantial, Mercer assured me. And with the Conservation Trust in place, federal agencies have jurisdiction that supersedes his local connections. The Geological Survey team is particularly excited about Dr. Vasquez's preliminary findings. Across the property, I watched as deputies handcuffed Carlisle and led him to a patrol car. His face was a mask of cold fury as he caught me watching. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. A man like him wouldn't go down without using every resource at his disposal. We should discuss protection options for you and your aunt, Mercer said, following my gaze. Carlisle will likely make bail, and he has associates who won't be deterred by his arrest. What about the property? We'll coordinate with the EPA and State Conservation Department to establish security protocols. Given the scientific and environmental significance, we can justify federal resources to protect the site. 2 days later, I sat in a conference room at the regional FBI office, surrounded by representatives from multiple agencies. Dr. Vasquez presented her findings to officials from the Department of Energy, the EPA, the Geological Survey, and the State University's Research Department. The mineral composition is unprecedented, she explained, displaying images on a large screen. The rare earth concentrations are at least triple what we find in the most productive current mines globally. But it's the crystalline structures that have us truly baffled. She showed magnified images of the crystal samples. These formations shouldn't exist naturally. The molecular alignment is too perfect, too deliberate. And the preliminary energy response tests suggest properties that could revolutionize multiple fields: energy storage, sound transmission, possibly even quantum computing. Anthony Diaz from the EPA followed with an environmental assessment. The underground system connects directly to the county's primary aquifer. Any conventional mining operation would risk contamination affecting thousands. However, he glanced at me, the extraction schematics found in the 19th century journals show remarkable foresight about environmental protection. If implemented with modern technology, they could allow for sustainable access. Agent Mercer summarized the criminal investigation. Richard Carlisle remains in custody, though his attorneys are working aggressively for his release. We've uncovered evidence suggesting his interest in this property goes beyond financial gain. His family archives contain references to some kind of legacy connected to the original Carlisle-Miller dispute. Throughout the presentations, I remained mostly silent, still processing everything that had happened. My worthless inheritance had transformed overnight into a resource of national significance, with implications for technology, energy, and environmental science. When finally asked for my input, I was ready with a clear vision. The Conservation Trust established by my uncle provides a framework for moving forward, I said. I propose we expand it to include representatives from each of your agencies, creating a collaborative oversight committee. My priority is ensuring this discovery benefits scientific advancement and environmental protection, not just commercial interests. And what about extraction rights? Asked the Department of Energy representative. These minerals are strategically valuable. Controlled extraction following Miller's methods, with profits funding research and conservation, I replied firmly. This isn't just about mining valuable resources, it's about understanding what makes them unique. The meeting concluded with unanimous support for my proposal. A task force would be formed, combining scientific research with responsible resource management. I would remain the principal trustee with veto power over any decisions that contradicted the original. Conservation vision, as the officials filed out, Dr. Vasquez lingered behind. "There's something I haven't shared with the others yet," she said quietly. "Those musical tones you described during the cavern collapse? We've detected similar acoustic phenomena in lab tests with the mineral samples. It's as if the crystals are responding to specific frequencies, almost like communication." "Communication? With what?" She shook her head. "I don't know, but it's unlike anything I've encountered in 20 years of geological research. I'd like your permission to assemble a specialized team, physicists, acoustic engineers, material scientists, for a more focused study once the chambers are accessible again." I thought about Miller's cryptic final clue. The heart of the secret lies where avarice and nature wage their eternal war. Perhaps there was something beyond mineral wealth that he'd discovered, something that had made him willing to disappear rather than reveal its location to Edward Carlyle. "Assemble your team," I agreed, "but proceed with caution. Whatever is down there has remained hidden for over a century for good reason." That evening, I finally visited Aunt Martha at her friend's house. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile than I remembered, but her eyes still held that familiar sharpness. "So," she said, as I sat across from her at the kitchen table, "Ben wasn't crazy after all." "No," I admitted. "He knew exactly what he was doing." She sighed, staring into her tea. "He tried to tell me once, about 10 years ago, said he'd found something important on that land. I told him to stop wasting time on foolish treasure hunts and focus on our retirement planning." The regret in her voice was palpable. For the first time, I saw past her prickly exterior to the painful recognition that she had missed something profound about the man she'd married. "Would you like to see the journals?" I offered. "Miller's and Uncle Ben's? They tell quite a story." Something that might have been gratitude flickered across her face. "Maybe someday. For now, I just want to know. Was it worth it? All those years he spent searching, all the secrecy?" I thought about the discoveries of the past week, the scientific possibilities, the environmental implications. "Yes," I said with certainty. "It was worth it. And I think he always knew you'd both be taken care of in the end." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer. As I prepared to leave, she surprised me by asking, "What will you do now, with all of this responsibility and attention?" It was a good question, one I'd been wrestling with myself. My previous life seemed distant now, as if it belonged to someone else. The job I'd lost, the cramped apartment, the bills I'd struggled to pay, all swept away by the inheritance that had initially seemed so worthless. "I'm staying," I decided in that moment. "Building a research facility near the property. There's too much to learn, too much to protect to walk away now." "You really are like him," she said, and for once, it didn't sound like criticism. Walking to my car under a clear night sky, I felt a sense of purpose I'd never experienced before. Uncle Ben had left me more than land or mineral rights. He'd left me a legacy to protect, a mystery to solve, and a future I could never have imagined for myself. 3 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. A modest research facility rose near the base of the third ridge, a single-story building with state-of-the-art laboratories and monitoring equipment. Solar panels and advanced water filtration systems ensured minimal environmental impact, while security features protected both the facility and the property from unauthorized access. The underground chambers had finally drained enough for preliminary exploration. Dr. Vasquez led the first scientific expedition, accompanied by specialists from multiple disciplines. I insisted on joining them. It was my property, after all, and I'd earned the right to be part of this discovery. We entered through the main shaft entrance, now reinforced with modern supports. The passages had been mapped using ground-penetrating radar, creating a comprehensive digital model of the underground system. Emergency communication equipment and air quality monitors provided layers of safety that Miller could only have dreamed of. The main cavern had changed dramatically since my last chaotic visit during the flood. Fallen debris from the ceiling had created new formations, while the water had carved additional channels through the softer rock. But the mineral veins remained intact, glittering with that same iridescent quality that had first captured my attention. "Remarkable," murmured Dr. Petrowski, a quantum materials specialist who had joined Vasquez's team. "The molecular structure is maintaining coherence despite the environmental disturbance. These aren't just mineral deposits, they're almost like organic crystal growths." "Living crystals?" I asked skeptically. "Not alive in the biological sense," he clarified, "but organized in ways that suggest adaptive properties. They're responding to external stimuli, light, sound, perhaps even electromagnetic fields." The research team spread throughout the chamber, collecting samples, taking measurements, and documenting everything with meticulous care. Each specialist found something remarkable from their particular perspective. Dr. Chen, an acoustic engineer, set up specialized equipment near where the flame-shaped formation had stood before the collapse. "I'm detecting harmonic resonance patterns, unlike anything in our databases. The crystals aren't just reflecting sound, they're modulating it, transforming acoustic energy into something else." "Into what?" I asked. "That's the question, isn't it?" he replied with scientific excitement. "Initial readings suggest possibly light, heat, or some form of electromagnetic radiation, but the conversion mechanism defies current physical models." As the team worked, I made my own careful exploration, carrying Miller's compass and using it to guide me to areas not yet examined by the scientists. Near where the stream cut through the cavern floor, I noticed something odd, a pattern in the rock that didn't match the natural erosion. Looking closer, I recognized tool marks, deliberate modifications to the stone, weathered by time but still discernible. Following these marks led me to a section of wall that appeared unremarkable at first glance, but when I held Miller's compass near it, the needle spun wildly before pointing directly at the seemingly solid rock. "Dr. Vasquez," I called. "I think there's something here." She joined me, examining the wall with practiced eyes. "You're right. These aren't natural formations. Someone modified this section." She ran her hand over the surface, feeling for irregularities. There could be a hidden chamber beyond this point. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed her suspicion. A void existed behind the wall, approximately 10 feet deep and 15 feet wide. With careful application of modern tools guided by archaeological preservation protocols, we created an opening, large enough to pass through. Beyond lay a chamber unlike any other in the cavern system. Where the main cavern was raw and natural, this space showed signs of deliberate construction: smooth walls, a level floor, and what appeared to be stone shelving cut into the rock. But most remarkable was what rested on a pedestal in the bayou center, a metal box identical to the one crushed during the collapse, and beside it, a crystal formation unlike any we'd seen before. The crystal stood about 18 inches tall, its structure perfectly geometric. Not the chaotic growth pattern of natural minerals, but something that appeared designed. It emitted a soft blue light that pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. "This can't be natural," Dr. Petrowski whispered, approaching the crystal with reverent caution. The symmetry, the internal structure visible through the translucent layers. This was created, not formed. "Created by whom?" Dr. Vasquez asked. The question we were all thinking. "This predates modern crystal synthesis technology by well over a century." I turned my attention to the metal box, which bore the same movable rings with symbols matching Miller's compass. With careful manipulation following the patterns I'd learned from the previous boxes, I managed to open it. Inside lay not a journal, but a single folded document and a small crystal similar to the larger formation, but only about 2 inches in length. I unfolded the paper to find a letter in Miller's now familiar handwriting. "To the one who solves the final puzzle, You have proven worthy of the heart of eternity's greatest secret. What lies before you is not of human origin. During my survey, work in 1889, I discovered not just rare minerals, but evidence of something beyond current scientific understanding. The crystal formations throughout these caverns are not natural deposits, but remnants of a technology far advanced beyond our own. The specimen before you is what I believe to be a seed crystal, the source from which all others grew. Its properties defy explanation by any scientific principle known to me. It responds to sound, generating light, heat, and other energies without apparent power source. When placed in water with certain mineral concentrations, it creates more crystals of similar structure. I have spent years documenting its properties, but fear my research may be misused if found. Edward Carlyle already suspects I've discovered something extraordinary and will stop at nothing to possess it. So I have hidden my most comprehensive notes separately from this chamber, with one final safeguard that only a true seeker will overcome. When resonance and harmony align, the final door shall be revealed. Study the crystal, understand its song. The knowledge it contains could transform humanity's future, for better or worse, depending on whose hands control it. With hope for wisdom to guide your path, Harrison Miller. I handed the letter to Dr. Vasquez, whose expression shifted from scientific curiosity to something approaching awe as she read. "This can't be possible," she murmured. "Self-replicating crystal technology in the 1880s. It would rewrite scientific history." Dr. Petrosky was examining the smaller crystal with handheld analytical instruments. "Whatever this is, it's emitting energy patterns I can't even classify. Not radiation in any conventional sense, but something else. Something our instruments aren't designed to measure." The implications were staggering. If Miller's letter was accurate, what we'd found wasn't just a valuable mineral deposit. It was technology of unknown origin, with properties that defied current scientific understanding. The rare earth elements were merely a byproduct, perhaps, even a protective layer concealing the true discovery beneath. As the research team documented the hidden chamber, I stepped back to process this revelation. Uncle Ben must have suspected the truth, or at least glimpsed parts of it during his decades of research. That's why he'd been so careful, why he'd established the Conservation Trust, why he'd chosen me specifically as his heir. The crystal's soft pulsing seemed to intensify as I watched, its blue light shifting subtly to violet, then back again. Was it responding to our presence? To our thoughts? The questions multiplied with each moment, expanding beyond geology and chemistry into realms of physics that bordered on the impossible. One thing was certain: Richard Carlyle could never learn the full extent of this discovery. Whatever his family's legacy claim might be, the power contained in these crystals required responsible stewardship, not exploitation. The Conservation Trust would need to be strengthened further, with additional protections specific to this new understanding. As I contemplated our next steps, Dr. Chen's voice broke through my thoughts. "There's something else you should see," he called from near the large crystal formation. "When we generate specific acoustic frequencies, the crystal responds with, well, it's easier to show you." He activated a small device that emitted a pure tone. In response, the crystal's pulsing changed rhythm, and faint lines of light appeared in the air around it, complex patterns that looked almost like writing. "It's generating some kind of projected information," Chen explained. "Possibly data storage and retrieval activated by specific sound frequencies. We've only tested a few basic tones, but the response patterns suggest an immense complexity beneath the surface." Miller's final clue echoed in my mind. When resonance and harmony align, the final door shall be revealed. He hadn't been speaking metaphorically. The crystal itself was the final door, a repository of knowledge activated by the right combination of sounds. His third journal might not exist on paper at all, I realized aloud. The information is stored in the crystal itself, waiting for the correct acoustic key to unlock it. As the implications of this discovery rippled through the research team, I felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on my shoulders. Uncle Ben had entrusted me with far more than land or minerals. He'd made me the guardian of a mystery that could transform human understanding of energy, matter, and perhaps even the question of whether we were truly alone in the universe.